Well, hey everybody. So I had this beautiful video that I did on this walk and it went poof. um, I wanted to talk a little bit about an encounter today, or a nice story rather than like maybe a teachable moment. I had the privilege of meeting the wonderful Olivia de Havilland. Early in my career, I was working with a family member, and that family member found out through a mutual acquaintance that I was a big fan. I've watched all of her films with my mom growing up. And it was interesting that, we didn't become best friends or anything like that. She lived in Paris and she was here visiting family. And there was like a connection though. Like, she grew up on the Isle of Wight. I grew up a lot of the time on Nantucket. And we talked about a trip that she made to Nantucket, which was the story she shared with me. I'll never forget it as long as I live. What an adventure at her age during that time period as a young woman to drive all the way to Nantucket by herself. And, one of the things, she came to a few events. She tried to give me marriage advice about my first ex-husband. And I just couldn't hear it at the time because I didn't want to divorce. My parents have married 60 years. I was really hanging on, and she was very astute. But of course, you don't get to that level of Hollywood and that level of stardom without being incredibly astute and incredibly observant. And as we all know, healers like myself have incredibly challenging lives so that we can share with others and come from experience rather than, knowing it all. And what was interesting is that the family member was in a lot of trouble just with their health on every level. And when I did meet Olivia de Havilland for the first time, she said, "Thank you so much for what you've done for my family. You are an extraordinary talent." She said, "I've met a lot of people that are supposedly like you, but," she said, "from the moment that you walked through the door that I met you, the light around you is unbelievable, and the presence that you have." And I said, "I'm not famous." And she kind of wagged her finger at me, said, "Oh, if you've got clients all over the world on different continents, you're the right kind of famous." And I said, "I didn't think about it that way, Olivia." And she was, she called me Gabriella, I called her Olivia. And she helped me in so many ways. And she was so astute. And it was the meeting of a lifetime, to be honest. And she lived in Paris, and I went to school in Paris, so I did speak French. And she was impressed by that, and that I had studied at the Sorbonne University, and that I had traveled Thor, and we just had a lot in common. And the kindness, like, I worked with their family member and helped in all this way, but yet my interactions with her, she was such a guiding force. Guys, and all I wanted to do was talk to her about her, and all she wanted to do was talk about me and my abilities and what I could do. And I have so many beautiful stories, like her first swimming lesson that she said, "You told me about your father being a lifeguard and how he taught you how to swim." And she said, "I never knew how to swim, and I grew up on the Isle of Wight, and I should know how to swim." I said, "Yes, you should." And she had her first swimming lesson with Esther Williams. I nearly died. I was like, "Can I come?" I was like, oh my God. And I had an appointment that day, so I couldn't. But she just giggled and laughed, and she goes, "Of course you know all the old Hollywood stars. If you know me, you know them." And I said, one thing I did share with her about her career that she didn't know. It's a cute, sweet little tidbit that she appreciated. I said, I bet you don't know a famous horse that you rode before he was famous. It was his first on-camera appearance. And she said, I have no idea. I've ridden so many horses on camera. And I said, well, it was in The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn. And man, did she tell me some stories about him. Woo! And man, was he handsome. If you don't know who Errol Flynn is, look him up. Probably one of the handsomest men in film history. And stories in that, like, why things don't work out, you know, and what she was explaining to me about my ex-husband. But when I looked at her about the horse, I said, you rode for the first time on camera before he was Trigger, the famous Trigger. He was 3 years old, and The Adventures of Robin Hood was his film debut. And it was just such a beautiful moment because her face lit up in such a way that was so genuine and kind. And she said, Gabby, I had no idea. And I said, you rode the famous Trigger. He was magnificent. He was only 3, and you sat on him and rode him like a pro. And we commiserated about a lot, but I can tell you, while I helped her family member like really improve their quality of life beyond measure, more so than anyone else had been able to do, and I was given a lot of thanks for that. Those quiet moments that I got to have with her when I got to see her were so amazing. Sorry, I was making sure no one was behind me. And to this day, I remember her wonderful presence and her humility and her beauty. Like, her hair was white and she always had it in this beautiful chignon, and her skin was incredible. And her eyes were like this chocolate brown, like she was magnificent at 90. I can't even imagine what she was like at 25, you know, during her career. So it was just a really an amazing moment because she was so grounded and kind. And actually, the exchanges between us were life-altering. And even down to like that red bicycle, I had a lot to do with that red bicycle. Nobody wanted her to get a bike at 90-something. And I kind of told everybody, let her live. I mean, it's a gated community. It's got 3 wheels. It's very stable. She's very active. I said, as long as she can, let her. Don't treat old people like old people. It makes them older faster. And we've got to include them in everything and not leave them behind. I remember on Nantucket, even the great William Macomber, who was Undersecretary of State, and his beautiful wife, when they got old, the invitation stopped. But my father never stopped inviting his old friends, even when they were in their 80s and 90s. He always invited them to the parties that we had. And I remember Bill saying one time, and Bill's, if you don't know who William Macomber is, look him up on Wikipedia. His books are fabulous. He was amazing. He was still consulting with several administrations, even when he had Parkinson's, from Nantucket. And he lived in a very modest house that was beautiful. His wife was fantastic. And I remember Bill saying one time, he didn't know that I heard, but he said, Don, you never forget us. And there's a lot of people now that we're getting old and I'm sick that forget about us. And my dad was also very special that way, and he taught me that. So that's why I gave that advice to the family with Olivia. And so I just wanted to share that story, because that wasn't just a moment of, oh, I met a celebrity. It was what an amazing many moments I had with her that altered my life and altered my perception for the very best. And so I've been very graced when I do work with people at that level. They are like the best of the best. And I get just amazing. And so it's all about energy. It's all about frequency. And like I said, I have permission to use the story. And, you know, I'm not mentioning the family member, but I have permission to use that too. But just out of respect, I would never mention the family member and what the issues were, because again, I function like a doctor. It's confidential unless you tell me it's not. So connectedenergyhealing.com if you need help with your pet or your health. And I hope you guys all have a great day. We made it back to the car, and I think this one's going to publish.